All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jen. I'm the Director of Marketing at Enactus Canada. We also have Jen Britton on the line, Senior Account Manager at North Strategic, and Maya Pearson, Co-Founder of North Strategic. So North is an Enactus Canada partner, and they've been kind enough to volunteer their time today to talk about public relations and specifically how you can help amplify the amazing work and the projects for your Enactus team using media relations. So before we get started, I'd like to ask everyone to please mute their phones if you're not already on mute. Shortly, I'll pass it over to Jen and Maya, who will start today's meeting by delivering a brief presentation, and then we can open the call up to address any questions you may have. So if you have any questions, there's a chat option in the GoToMeeting pop-up window on the right hand of your screen. So you can just submit it that way. I also received a number of questions through the registration form that we'll also kind of go through as part of the Q&A session as well. Does that sound good? Cool. Can anyone not? That's great. Awesome. Can anyone not see Jen's screen right now? You should see Media Relations 101 kind of hold slide right now. Awesome. Cool. Jen, Maya, thank you guys. Over to you.
Sure. Okay, so it's Maya. I'm going to kick it off and then start with the first kind of 4 slides, and then Jen's going to jump in from there. So we thought this would be a really great opportunity for some training around accelerating your brand, the work that you're doing for each of your teams, but also as we go into the nationals, the more that you can be pushing for getting some earned media and coverage about the great work you're doing, the more you can get engagement on social media, the better in terms of your submission and the overall momentum you'll have around your business. So we want to make sure that there's lots of time for Q&A. So we'll probably present for about 10 to 15 minutes, but we think there's going to be a lot more value in the Q&A part. So feel free to ask questions at that point, and we can get into specific answers at that time. So let's just start with the agenda. So we're going to start by talking about why we're all here. What's the value of PR? What can it do for each of you and your teams? 2, how do you even go about finding your media targets? What would that look like? What's the best approach? Crafting a compelling pitch. So just for context, reporters get hundreds and hundreds of pitches a day. We want to help you to figure out how do you get their attention and how do you move to the top of their inbox. We'll talk about media outreach. There's an approach for really effective media relations. And then interview prep. Should you be successful in getting an interview, how do you prepare and make sure that you put your best messages forth to ensure a great positive article for your initiative and your team? So next slide, we want to talk about the PR success. So some of you have been doing a really good job already. And just for context, this is what we're talking about. This kind of coverage gives you a lot of credibility around the work that you're doing. So, you know, as much as you'll see your own results and each team is working towards great community initiatives and you start to really grow those local businesses, the reality is that until a third party says that you're doing a great job, sometimes you don't always get that profile. The other great thing about coverage like this is it's really going to help you in terms of your social media channels and engagement because, again, a third party has seen your initiative as something worth covering in the media. So that's what we're all looking towards getting. So building on that, I talked a little bit about the credibility. It also increases awareness. So you may be doing work in a small town or in one community, but some of this coverage can sometimes go national. And we'll talk more about the media outlets, but there's certain outlets that you might get a regional reporter to cover your story. There may be a reporter, say, I don't know, in Nova Scotia who might write a story, but then if they're part of a national network like Ken West or Canadian Press, then sometimes those good news stories get picked up right across the country. So there's a lot of great momentum you can get beyond just the local story that you might be pitching. The other thing is that you have key moments to promote. So when there's been, you know, you have a big, I don't know, initiative that's coming to life, you have great people working or that you're working towards helping in the community, those are opportunities where you can look for unique story angles, and we'll talk more about how you identify those. And the last thing, it'll create new opportunities. I know you're all looking for additional local sponsorship. You're looking to win at the regional level and national level and maybe even global level. And the ability to get this kind of coverage and be recognized for the great work you're doing will open up more doors. And other companies in your community, in your region may see the great work you're doing and contact you to see how they can back you or get involved. So there's a lot of, unintended consequences for earned media that can help your businesses and your initiatives really grow. So PR can be a really effective tool. One interview could help you reach, millions of people across Canada. So there's a huge opportunity for that kind of growth and for that kind of awareness and momentum for the great work that you're each doing on your local teams.
So now we're going to move on to identifying and sort of sourcing media targets. So, when we look at who you should be targeting, Canadian media are, going to be your #1 priority. Organizations like CBC are, very aligned with an organization like Enactus. So they would be a great target. And I know that that's an outlet that Enactus and a lot of the different teams have had success with in the past. As Maya just touched on a little bit, hometown media.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. It looks like we dropped your screen.
Oh.
I don't know if you changed anything on your end. I'm just going to make you the presenter again to get that back up. Just 1 second, guys.
Okay, perfect.
Is it back up now?
No, I actually don't see you in the presenter list.
Is there any way you could pull it up?
Yeah, 1 second.
Just because in case there's technical difficulties on this end, and then we can just tell you when we're moving the slide forward.
For sure, 1 second.
Thank you.
All right.
So we're on slide 5.
Are we good to go?
Yeah, can everyone see my screen now?
Yep.
Perfect, thank you for confirming. All right, sorry about that, guys, back to you.
Okay, great. So obviously, as I mentioned, you're going to be prioritizing Canadian media, but hometown media specifically will be a really great opportunity for you, just given the local angle. So smaller regional outlets love a good hometown story, and this is such a positive, positive Canadian feel-good story. So that's, I think, an area that a lot of the teams have already had a lot of success with, and definitely something that you should be keeping in mind because they're going to be more likely to want to cover somebody that's from their hometown. And then, of course, student papers. Obviously, schools want to support their students, so another area that is important for you guys to be focusing on. And then when you're looking at the different subject matter and the audience that you want to reach, look at reporters who cover entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial stories. Small business media will be a great option for you. That lifestyle journalist especially the smaller regions like your hometowns or the student papers, the lifestyle angle is a great target. And then, of course, nonprofit, any outlets or journalists who specifically cover nonprofit organizations. And then trade publications that are related specifically to your project are always a great target. So, if you're doing something specific to the food industry, targeting a publication that would cover that topic. And we'll move on to the next slide. Specifically finding media targets. So, at first thought, it might sound like a difficult task, but it's actually pretty easy. Journalists are always looking for great stories, so their contact information is generally not too hard to track down. You know, at North Strategic, we have a lot of different tools that we use that we pay for, but to be honest, a lot of the time we just go back straight to these different tactics here. So whether it's going to the contact us section of a website or the masthead in a newspaper or magazine, Twitter and LinkedIn have created great opportunities for tracking down media. If you're really having trouble tracking down a journalist's email or contact information, don't be afraid to direct message them on Twitter or LinkedIn, or even just tweet at them. They're very open to this, they're very used to it, and they're usually pretty responsive because journalists tend to be on those platforms. And same for Facebook. If you go to the About sections of a Facebook page for a specific outlet, you should be able to track down some type of contact information. But first and foremost, honestly, Google. Just typing in the journalist's name should generally provide some sort of contact information for you, or at least a starting point. So it's really not as tricky as you might think.
And one of the tips I would say is to it can be overwhelming because there could be a lot of reporters you could target. So for some of our clients, sometimes we're looking at 100 journalists, say, for a specific news release or announcement. But I would say for each of you, if you just looked at who do you think are the top 10 reporters that would be most interested in your story, start there and get to know them and start to develop a bit of a relationship, even if it's on social media, so that they can start to understand your story and then follow it as you get some big news announcements to go with.
And take a look too at who has covered Enactus in the past, because you can consider them friendly and likely to cover Enactus again in the future. So that's a great starting point as well, is just see who has already covered and start there. So moving on to the next slide, crafting a compelling pitch. There are a few things that you're going to want to keep in mind as you start to draft your pitch for media. So first of all, don't underestimate a compelling subject line. I think Maya already mentioned it, but media get hundreds of pitches a day. So you want yours to stand out. So a catchy or compelling subject line in the email is a great start. Be clear, concise, and organized. Bullets are cool. Again, media are getting hundreds of these pitches a day, so making sure that your email is to the point, that the key details are easily identifiable is really important, and that's where bullets play a great role. I always like to, when I draft a pitch, at the bottom of my email, under my signature, I actually like to just put a summary of details and bullet out exactly what the opportunity is that I'm offering, so that if they don't want to read my whole email, they can just scan down and see the key information in the bullets. Put your hook in the first line. So again, if they're not going to read your full email, they're hopefully going to read at least the first sentence. So make sure that the first, one or two sentences in your pitch are compelling. Think about it from the journalist's perspective. What is the headline of the story that they're going to write? And make that the introduction to your pitch. Personalize your emails. So, Maya mentioned it, but don't be afraid to start looking at building a relationship with media. And as you start to do that, personalize your emails when you're reaching out to them, so that you're sending them really tailored pitches that you're showing that you've done your homework. You're showing that you think this really could be the right fit for them. When they're getting hundreds of emails a day, a lot of them are just BCC'd out. So when you do send a personal email, it's a nice touch and it won't go unnoticed. So if you're, for you guys, you're not necessarily going to be contacting hundreds and hundreds of journalists. So if you're only going out to your top 10 or your top 15 media targets, it shouldn't require too much extra time for you to personalize them. And again, localize your story. Media love a good local angle. So especially when you're reaching out to hometown media, don't be afraid to say that, you're born and raised or you're currently living in that specific community, and show them that it's relevant to the audience that's reading their coverage or their stories. Visuals are never a bad idea. As a best practice, we recommend embedding any visuals within the body of your email versus an attachment. Again, it's just one less step for the journalist, and they might not necessarily open an attachment. So if you put it right there, they can't miss it. And visuals just are really great ways to help bring the story to life for them, and to, if you're explaining a complicated product that you've created or a complicated idea, sometimes just having a picture that they can see just helps bring together everything for them so that it actually makes sense and it clicks. And again, make sure, this is part of making sure that you are making it easy for the journalist. So make sure all of the information that they need is in your email. You don't want them to have to reply to you to ask for more information or more detail if they don't have to. So the who, what, where, why, and when are important to include in the initial email that you're going to be sending a journalist. And use your handbook when you're crafting a pitch. So what's really great is that Enactus has a messaging and media outreach handbook available for everybody. So in that, there are tons of great messaging that you can look to include from Enactus. There's a lot of really great stats, and I believe there are some updated stats that will be available soon, if they're not already, for this year. So those are always great to include. Stats like this are always very compelling for media. And there's lots of just great insight in that handbook. So don't be afraid to look at it and to use it as you're starting to draft your pitch. And we're on the media outreach slide. This is just, again, a little bit of a summary of things to keep in mind. So do your homework on the journalist and the outlet that you're targeting. Make sure that you've got the right journalist and that you're understanding who they're communicating to, who their audience is, and that you have the right fit for that. Keep the pitch short, simple, to the point. Visuals, always good. And then in terms of the actual outreach, generally speaking, media prefer to be contacted via email. So we always recommend starting by email, and then if you want to send a follow-up email, that's okay, or you can follow up on the phone. But generally, that's how journalists are communicating these days, on email, and they will get back to you if it's something that they're interested in. And we like to usually give them about 24 hours if you send an email before you follow up, just to let it sit and make sure that they have had a chance to look at your email. They're on deadlines. They're getting hundreds of these a day, so you don't want to come across as pushy. And then once you have secured an interview opportunity for yourself, there are a few things that we would recommend that you do in order to prep for that interview, just to make sure that you're coming across composed and making sure that you are going to communicate your key messages and the message and the story that you want to tell in that interview. So first of all, confirm the details. It sounds straightforward, but make sure that you understand if you're doing a live phone interview, if you're doing an on-camera interview, and is it going to be live or taped? Is it an in-person meeting? So just make sure you have the details right, and the timing, of course. And do your homework. Again, understand the journalist and understand the outlet so that you can tailor your message and your story to them in a way that makes sense and that's going to encourage them to produce coverage out of it. It'll make that more likely. Key messages are important to prepare in advance, and that handbook that Enactus has already created can help you identify what some of the key messages are going to be that you want to come across in your interview. But make sure that you set up, as a best practice, we generally recommend having 3 key messages prepared in advance of any interview. So that's just making sure that if you have 3 things, and these are the only 3 things that are going to come across in this interview, these are the most important. So figure out what those are for you up front, and then do your best to integrate them throughout the interview. Also, it's always helpful to prepare some anticipated Q&A. Sometimes, especially in this case, the journalist is often very likely to share their questions in advance. So don't be afraid to ask once you've set up the interview if they would be willing to share a list of questions, because they very well might be. And then take some time to walk through what you want your responses to be and how you can integrate your key messages into those responses. Don't be late. Journalists are on deadlines and they are busy. There's not as many of them as there used to be, so they're all doing more work than they maybe were a year ago. So being respectful of their time is very important. And then lastly, monitor for the coverage and share it on social media. So, you know, once you do get that great article that appears, you don't want to miss it, and you want to make sure that you're maximizing its reach. So always share it on your social channels, and you know, you're working with an amazing organization like Enactive Canada, tag them as well, because then they can share it and amplify the reach even further.
And just around the interview prep, keep in mind that when you do an interview, you may be on the phone with the reporter for sometimes 10, maybe 20 minutes. They may ask you 15 questions, which means you might give them 30 to 45 sentences. Only one will appear in print, maybe two. So it's really, really important to always stay on message and to watch yourself from trailing into more negative territory or into other areas that might not project such a positive story. So even if you're reiterating those key messages that you want to get across a few times, that's okay. The point is you want to get one or two killer quotes out there that are going to be just so, you know, impactful and that are going to give the best impression possible of your initiative and also Enactus overall. And then just before we go into questions, we looked at some of the preliminary questions, and there was a lot around social media. So this has been pretty focused on the earned media part, which is pure media relations, and PR, which is working through, you know, broadcast TV, print, and magazines or online coverage. But we can definitely open the Q&A and talk more about social media as well. We're happy to give advice on that front. The point of this kind of coverage, so social media is great, and we want you to continue to do that, get high engagement. We can talk about strategies for that. But this is kind of taking it one step further, where you're actually pitching your story to a reporter to get the reporter to write about it. And one of the things that all the research shows is that if a reporter writes a positive story, the credibility factor goes up, you know, tenfold from you writing your own story or doing your own post on social or an ad that you might place. So everyone believes that when a reporter has written about something, it's got to be true. They would have vetted it, and that they all know that they picked the best stories to talk about. So what we're trying here to do is to take your social channels even one step further and work to get this earned media coverage and leverage the channels of the media to expand awareness and promote your story in a much bigger way than you can do on your own channel. So that's it in terms of just some quick tips and tricks and some kind of exposure to what media relations is all about. But now we want to open it up to Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Maya. Jen, this is Jen at Enactus Canada. So just to kind of reiterate, guys, we have a few people on the call, so feel free if you want to send a question through the chat option in the GoToMeeting pop-up. I also don't think we have a ton of people, so if you want to just kind of speak up, just introduce yourself and hop right in. But I can get things started by addressing some of the questions that were sent through the registration form. So I'll start there. So Maya, you had mentioned that some of them were kind of on social. This one particularly is. So is it beneficial to create separate accounts for each project?
So for your case, or for the case of Inactive Teams, we would recommend against creating separate channels, just because you've already taken so much time building a community and building a following that you don't want to lose that. You don't want to lose that community and the engagement that you've already created. And it's interesting for people to see the different projects that you're working on. So in this particular case, we would say stick with one channel, so that you are not losing the community that you've already spent a lot of time and energy building.
And even though some of the different projects may have different audiences, they all will have a commonality around the idea of, you know, social good and supporting social causes and entrepreneurship, especially at the youth level. So I think that because of that, you still have a strong common link between project to project. And it will help with the momentum. So definitely one channel and put all your effort there, or it'll be like starting from scratch every single time.
Awesome. What is the best avenue to communicate with organizations and new communities you wish to expand a program to?
So I would say, media relations is a great way. So if you want to go into a new community, you could pitch that local newspaper and talk to them about the great work you've done in the one that started, and then what your kind of vision is for the new community. So I think a community paper would be very interested in the story and would be a great place to build a foundation for that story in that community. And you could do that as well with the industry in the same way. The other thing you could do is, when you look at social media, is when you're going into new communities or into new industries, especially on Twitter, you can search by people who have commonality or interest in that community and also your cause, and start to follow them, and they'll start to follow you back, and then they'll start to engage more with your content. So be really targeted even with social in terms of the people that you're following and engaging with on an ongoing basis.
Great. So here's another question that we got. We focus so much on promotion over social media. What other avenues, be it media relations or other options, should we also be promoting our projects through?
So I would say through traditional PR, like we've just talked about, would be just as valuable. I'm not sure how relevant this would be to Enactus students specifically, but if you are doing any type of speaking engagements or participating in any events on campus, I think communicating your message through those platforms as well is a great way to also sort of reach new audience.
So there's lots of associations. So say, again, we talked about food. Say your project is around, something related to the food industry. Then if there was ever an association that was meeting about that in your community, you could ask to speak about the great work you're doing. So there's also like local board of trades across the country would be more than happy to hear from a student talking about their entrepreneurial initiative. So speaking ops are definitely a great strategy in addition to public relations and media relations.
Great. For some of our newer teams that may be just starting out, what are some of the ways to gain a social media presence?
Yeah, so I think one of the ways to do it is, like Maya just talked about, making sure that you're following the right groups and organizations on your social channels as well. So being targeted in who you're following, so that you're engaging with people that are relevant to your project and to Enactus. And then I would also recommend making sure that you're using hashtags. Those are, something that other similar or like-minded organizations will be searching for. So making sure that you're using hashtags that are relevant and applicable for each of your posts on social is important.
Yep. And then I think, like, when you put up your page for the first time, whether it's on Twitter or on Instagram or any of the different channels, LinkedIn, the use of visuals. So Jen talked a lot about the power of visuals, like really show the kind of impact you're having in the communities through your visuals, so that when someone goes on and sees it, it's pretty self-explanatory and it's exciting, and it's compelling, and they want to support you or follow you. So that would also be important. The other thing in terms of your posts, don't just retweet or repost things. Look at how you can create your own content, have a strong point of view on an industry. If, generally, there's a strong cause that you're trying to help or work towards. And so be really strong around what needs to be done. You can always tweet out to government. There's all kinds of ways to really make your content compelling so that you're seen as a real thought leader versus someone who's just retweeting or refollowing things that other people are doing.
Awesome. And this is Jen from Enactus. Just to kind of add on to the hashtag comment, guys, a reminder too that we use a bunch of branded hashtags across the board here, Enactus Regionals, Enactus Nationals, and that's a great way to kind of tap into the conversation we already have taking place online around our events. So don't forget about those ones as well, and that's in the marketing handbook as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
The other thing I And one of the other things, Jen, we could talk about is if you have a sponsor, you know, I know that there's some regional competitions, the national for sure, but then even for different programs that are happening throughout the year, you know, if there's a big sponsor that's behind the work that you're doing, or you're participating in one of those things, then copy them as well. Like, what would be examples, Jen, of big ones like Tim Hortons or?
Yeah, and Scotiabank, TV, Capital One. So any of the like national challenge sponsors, for example, they're very active at our events. Rihanna is a big player as well. So definitely if you tag them in your social posts, we find that they'll always share and kind of retweet or kind of respond to the messages. And again, driving engagement just drives more loyalty and kind of fosters those relationships.
Yeah, and they have massive reach, so that, like, what you really want to look at is what are the channels when, you know, you're all busy, you're going to school full time, you know, you've got the competitions happening, you've got the business going and your projects on the go. So everything you put in towards this, you want to make sure that it's having impact. So, you know, the national partners have big impact and big reach. Media has big impact and big reach. So always be looking at that when you're investing your time in the promotion aspect of the work you're doing, invest it in the right way so that you're getting the right outcomes. Because you can spend a lot of time on social media just sharing and retweeting that really never grows your network.
Yeah, I also think too some of the Enactive teams have marketing budgets. So if you also allocate a portion around kind of boosting some of your social media content to target specific demographic groups or areas, you know, that also helps your cause.
Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions you're seeing come through, or does anyone have a question they just want to ask on the phone?
We actually got one question through the chat. So is it more effective to do PR release or contact writers directly to get an article written?
I think in your case, it's more effective to reach out directly to a journalist or a publication to get coverage. Press releases generally are for larger organizations that are sort of national news. So I think for you guys, you want to get it, you know, you're really identifying the most relevant outlets and going out with a more targeted, tailored approach is going to help you see more success.
Yeah, the one thing I would say though is the press release provides all the information typically that reporters need. So make sure in your pitch, although you don't write it like a press release, you're going to write it as a story pitch, but make sure that you include the who, what, when, where, why that Jen talked about, and that's typically what they would find in a news release.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, so we just got a question via the chat on where they can access the messaging and marketing handbook. So we'll actually provide this presentation after the meeting with a link to the marketing handbook. But also, if you guys ever have any questions around kind of Enactus messaging, feel free to connect with your program manager, or you can contact the marketing team at marketing@enactus.ca or jen@enactus.ca. That's my personal email address as well. But everything will come after the call.
The other thing I would say is if now, or, you know, just following this, if there were other questions or other areas around marketing, promotion, PR, social media that you are really interested in, send those over, and, you know, maybe we could look at doing something like this on a quarterly basis and be able to, you know, customize one more around social media, since everyone had a lot of questions about that. We could look at that as one maybe in a couple of months. So love your feedback and really happy to invest in helping you all do the best job possible at promoting the great work that you're doing.
Definitely. Another thing I just want to say is, as part of your team registrations, we're always, just because we do a lot of media relations on behalf of all of our teams leading up to the event, so we always are asking for, you know, new team projects and kind of imagery and visuals and stuff around that. So guys, please feel free to provide more info around that, your impact metrics, because we are sending pitches to media across the country before each event, and we've been successful in a number of areas. So definitely just share more, and we will be in touch with you guys if, you know, kind of a project story has appealed to a certain journalist that wants to chat with you. Great. On that note, does anyone have any final questions? Cool. Well, thank you, Jen and Maya, so much for your time today, and thank you guys for all dialing in and listening in. Like I said, we will follow up with today's presentation deck as well as a recording of the webinar, just in case you kind of had to hop off briefly or you missed any of the Q&A.
Great, thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.